I'd like to welcome you all to the San Francisco Forum. This evening we're having a debate on the subject of are humans hardwired against freedom? And our debaters are Walter Block and Block-Wenzel. Walter is the author of numerous books. The most popular is Defending the Undefendable, and there are 3 volumes of that. And Robert Wenzel is the author of Foundations of Private Property Society Theory, which is Anarchism without the non-aggression principle, and the Flunks, which gives the Federal Reserve a report card, and they fail. The structure for the debate is divided into 4 parts. First, we have an introduction. Walter will be speaking for 15 minutes, then Bob speaking for 15 minutes, then a response, 5 minutes each, and then a Q&A. And we ask that you limit your questions to 1 minute and the responses to 2 minutes. And finally, a summary for each. And then Bob will start with the summary for 5 minutes. Walter will end with a 5-minute summary. And I'm Michael Edelstein, the moderator. So Walter, do you want to start?
Now, some people will say, well, it's because the schools are very bad. The elementary schools, the high schools, the colleges. But then why are they so bad in the first place? Some people will say, well, it's the journalists, or the clergy, or the lawyers, or whoever else it is. But then each time we have an explanation of that sort, the question immediately arises, well, why is that? Why are there so few teachers who are libertarians? Why are there so few lawyers who are libertarians? So my co-authors and I just wrote a paper, got rejected 46 times in referee journals, and on the 47th time we were lucky, we got it published. And we try to explain this on the basis of sociobiology. So what's sociobiology? Sociobiology is the theory that we are the way we are now, based on what it meant to leave progeny to the next generation about 1 million years ago when we were in the caves or the trees of wherever we were in 1 million years ago, or 100,000 years ago, whatever, a long, long time ago. And my claim is that what it meant to survive and leave progeny in those days was not libertarianism, and we are hardwired against libertarianism. There's a council of despair. I devote my whole life to it, to promoting liberty and good economics, even though I think that we're not going to win, but still it's fun. It's fun to tweet those socialist noses and those neocon noses. So let me give you a few tidbits of sociobiology. Most people are afraid of snakes. If we saw a snake here, we'd sort of pull out our guns and shoot it, or we've got guns here, but we would not be happy with snakes. Anyone afraid of a bathtub? Nobody's afraid of a bathtub. Yet a bathtub killed Milton Friedman. He was taking a shower, he slipped his head, and he hit on the side of the bathtub. He died on the way to the hospital. Little kids are instinctively afraid of a snake. Nobody's afraid of a bathtub. Why? Well, 1 million years ago, if you were afraid of a snake, you were more likely to leave progeny than if you would go up and pat a snake and say, nice snakey, you know. Whereas if you were afraid of a bathtub, it conveyed no benefit to you. Another example is, why is it that most guys see a 22-year-old girl and are very interested in her in a sexual way? They see a 65-year-old woman and they're not really that interested. Well, because 1 million years ago, if we had a tribe just like us, same power, same opposable thumb, same brain, only they were interested in 65-year-old women, they wouldn't leave too many children to the next generation. So we are the heirs of people who were interested in 22-year-olds rather than 65-year-olds. That's why most of us are interested in that way. Another example would be, men are much more willing to share their sperm than women are willing to share their eggs. It's true. I mean, you know, there was this survey, a very beautiful woman and a very good-looking guy, actors, went to a college campus, and they each had the same script. And they would go to members of the opposite sex, and they would say things like, I have a motel room over there. How'd you like to spend an hour or two with me doing what comes naturally? And the girl got a lot of interest. I'm like 95% of the men she approached said, yeah, let's go. Whereas the guy, very, very good-looking guy, 2% success. Women are not willing to share as much because they have a different strategy to leave children in the next generation. Men, spread it around, the more the merrier, and the more kids you'll get. Women only have so many eggs. Women, the limit of women is, 25 kids tops biologically. Men, I don't know how many babies a man can have if he's really active, hundreds. So this is sociobiological. Millions of years ago, we lived in groups of about this size, 20, 25, 30 people, something like that. We knew each other intimately because we lived our whole lives together. We knew every jot and tittle of everybody. And the policy that would lead us to survive and lead leave kids to the next generation was being nice. If I'm sick this week and you help me, next week you're sick, I help you, our tribe survives. If I'm sick this week and you say, too bad I'm Walter, and next week you're sick and I say the same to you, well, we're not going to survive. So we are very, very hardwired to be nice to each other on a personal basis among families. But we're not hardwired to do that commercially because nowadays what we're called upon is to interact not with 20 people or 25 people, but with 2 billion, 4 billion people. I mean, I got this watch. How many people made this watch to get the watch to me? I don't know, thousands maybe? The iPencil, you're familiar with that? To get a pencil to you takes the cooperation of millions of people, at least hundreds of thousands, literally. And we don't know them. And the idea is somehow that if we treat people nicely, commercially, that this is good. I get freshman students in my class every year, and they hear about price gouging, and they are appalled. Why? Because individual family units don't charge each other a ton of money when there's a shortage. But the market does that. Similarly, we all have 2 kidneys, and we will donate those kidneys to our children or to our cousin or to our brother or our sister. We're not going to donate to a stranger. Namely, we don't treat people in a commercial way the way we treat family members. So the reason that we are so few is because we're heavily biologically, not determined, but biased in the direction of treating people like family, treating them amiably, but we don't live in an amiable family society. We now live in a society with millions of people who we are supposed to interact with in an economic way. Baby selling. Freshman students in my school are just, horrified by this because this is a commercial activity, and they have in mind what they are hardwired to have in mind, namely to treat people as family members, and this doesn't do that. Now, one mistake that people make is they want to treat strangers like family members. That's a mistake. The opposite mistake is to treat family members commercially. Imagine, there's an economics of gift giving. It's much more efficient to give gifts in terms of money, because you never know exactly what the recipient of the gift is going to buy with it, right? So, which would you rather have, $100 or 5 meals at McDonald's and a shoe and a tennis racket? $100, because you might not want to spend the money in the other way. But it would be a mistake to give you $100 if you're a family member or your wife on the anniversary. Don't give her $100. If you give her $100, you're going to get a divorce. Namely, you'd be making the opposite mistake. You'd be treating a familial person in a commercial way. So my claim is that the reason we have so few libertarians is because we are biased, not hardwired, not determined. I'm a free will kind of person, but we are biased in the direction of treating people like a family member, and it doesn't work in the commercial area. And people say, well, you know, it should work in the commercial area because they're hardwired to think it should work in the commercial area. So they make that first mistake. Very few people make the opposite mistake. There are some authors, J.R. Clarke and Dwight Lee, who wrote this thing about the amiable and the mundane. The amiable is like familial family relations. And what they say, and what I say in my article, is we're hardwired, I say, again, to treat commerce in a family way, and this is inappropriate. Another element of this is in the good old days, we probably needed a leader. And people, when we were trying to get the woolly mammoth, if you didn't cooperate, we didn't get the woolly mammoth. And in order to cooperate, you need a conductor. You know, you play the cello, and I tell you you play the piccolo, and I tell you to play. Probably we needed a leader in those days, and we are hardwired for leaders. Whereas the way the market works, there's no leader. Any entrepreneur who can get up on his hind legs and start a store is free to do that. And yet, you know, the politician, you know, we have to have Trump or Bush or Obama or somebody like that. So we are hardwired in that way as well. So it's benevolence and leadership in that way. Let me give you just a few more instances of sociobiology. Why are we disgusted by incest? And I'm talking not about kids, but you know, adults, brother and sister, mother and son of an adult. Many good children, as our parents left. So that's why the revulsion about incest. Another example is they do these experiments where they'll put you in a room, and they'll say, just wait here. And the real thing will, you know, you have to wait here 15 minutes, and then we'll take you to the room where the exam is. But that was really the test. And what it was is there are 500 different things there. There's a toothbrush, there's a banana, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And then they test men and women, and they say, well, how many things do you remember that were there? And the man says, oh, I don't know, there was a picture of a nude girl, and that's about all that they remember. Whereas the women can remember 50 things. On the other hand, men have a better sense of direction. Why is this important? Why are men and women different? Because when we're in the caves, the women had to be able to pick berries and know where the berries were. They were very meticulous, but they didn't have to travel long distances to get the deer or the antelope or whatever it was. Whereas if a man didn't have a good sense of direction, he couldn't get back to the cave, he couldn't leave more children. And if a woman, thank you, and if a woman didn't need a big sense of direction. That's why we have that difference. Another thing is, well, if we're so hardwired, how come there are some libertarians? All the people in this room are at least libertarian, or at least interested in why there are so few libertarians. And my claim is that we're mutants. We are biological mutants. Not that we started out that way. I didn't start out that way. I went to high school with Bernie Sanders. I was a Pinko commie until Ayn Rand converted me to the one true faith. But at least I was open to it. The people who are now libertarians at least were open to it. But most people are not mutants. Mutants means that it's a biological risk. Again, let me just close by saying that this is not the counsel of despair. I don't think we're going to win, and I'm trying to explain why we're not winning, because I'm a social scientist. So what social scientists are supposed to do is to try to understand reality. And an important part of reality is that there are so few of us, and we want to know why. And I'm offering a theory which I think is a better theory than many other theories. Certainly better than, you know, high school teachers were no good, and, you know, college teachers are no good, but then why? The article that I wrote with two co-authors is I first started with this sociobiological stuff. And then my colleague John Levendis said, but wait, there was 10,000 years ago, there were instances of trade. And the instances of trade where they'd come up with a small group of people, and there were 300 pots. And then over here there'd be 300 spears, 3,000 spears, and only 30 people. So from this they deduced that, you know, if you make so many more than you need, you must be trading. So maybe my theory was wrong. And then the third article written by a biologist, what he said is, yes, we also have a biological tendency to trade, the barter and truck, as Adam Smith said. But it's only 10,000 years old, or 15,000 years old, whereas this stuff goes way back to when we were mammals. If you look at mammals, the mother fights to keep the young going. So my time is up. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, before we start the time, I just want to let you know, this building was built in 1914, and it was the tallest building in San Francisco at that time. So there was a lot of progress, a lot of exchange going on since this building was the tallest building in San Francisco. Also, I want to take a quick poll. How many people here, as opposed to saying the Earth was the center of the universe, how many people think the sun is the center where all the planets revolve and the sun is in the center? How many people think that's the case now? Okay, we got a couple of people that don't think so. Okay, well actually if you don't think so, that's actually true. Now you can start the time and I'll explain why in my paper. First I want to I'm honored that Dr. Block has agreed to debate on this. I consider him one of the most significant libertarians of our age. I've written many times that he deserves the Nobel Prize. I'm setting you up. I've written many times that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He's been a consistent supporter of liberty, peace, and it's caused him all kinds of aches and pains with major newspapers, with universities and everything else, but he never buckles. And he's a major significant figure to me and really one of my intellectual godfathers. So Walter, thank you very much. Now, as far as this paper, which is called Evolutionary Psychology, Economic Freedom, Trade, and Benevolence, which is written, co-authored by Walter Block and John Levendis and Robert Eckhart. I mean, there's a lot of things I see wrong in this, and it would take me too long to cover all the problems. I mean, I'm getting 15 minutes. I would need 3 hours to just touch on it. But what's interesting is, I've got stuff written all over the place, but then it stops. Every once in a while, it stops. And where it stops, I've read enough of Walter's stuff, is that when it's Walter's writing, Walter's economics is right. Okay, he's got that right in here, and it's these other guys that are really messing stuff up. So I think what must have happened is they must have put Walter in a room, and it's some kind of academic Stockholm syndrome. And I'm here to break that tonight, okay? So I have to agree with Walter when he talked about Hardwired, about everything except the libertarian thing, and I'll explain that. But even more at a core level, when I think of Hardwired, I think of language. If you go anywhere on the planet, people know how to communicate. Homo sapiens are the species that is most able to communicate. Anywhere you go on the planet, you're going to find that. So that's something that's really hardwired. The same thing with the ability to think. Anybody here not thinking? Is there anybody? Okay, you're all thinking. So it's a situation, different degrees of thought and ability, but everybody thinks, everybody sleeps. We're all hardwired in many, many ways. And most of the bio stuff that you've talked about, I get that. I understand how that's hardwired. However, there are things that are not hardwired that just happen to be so that everybody believes, and there is nothing about them that suggests they will always have to be believed. For example, for many, many years, people thought the Earth was flat. Everybody thought that. So there would be a tendency to think that, it's sort of hardwired into us until people traveled and they said, hey, we didn't fall off. We found new continents and all that kind of stuff. Then there was a period when, the same period, when people thought the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun revolved around the universe, or around the Earth. And now we all, quote, know that the sun is the center and the planets revolve around that. And it sort of seems logical and makes a lot of sense. But if you really look at it, it's really intellectual leaders that are telling us this. We don't know it. I doubt anybody in here can explain how that theory came about or why it came about. And the fact of the matter is, it's wrong. So is it because everybody believes this? But is it because we're hardwired? Or is it because the intellectual thought process that we've caught on has given us the idea that's false? Now the thinking is, and I can't explain this in any depth, but astronomers think there's something called a barycenter. You can look this up on the internet, which is really the center where all the planets go. The sun is sort of very close to the barycenter, but it moves around. So the planets aren't circling the sun, they're circling the barycenter. And maybe at some point, this is what they're going to teach kids, and all kids are going to know that the barycenter is at the core. But it's nothing about hardwired. It's nothing about hardwired when people thought that it was the Earth as the center of the universe, or most people now think it's the sun. It apparently could be something else. So what we've got is a situation where a lot of people can think things, but it depends upon what comes down from the great thinkers. It's a specialization of labor, intellectual labor. And it's impossible for us to think in large degrees across the board, across the spectrum. Same thing with economics, same thing with lots of societal things. For example, the paper mentions minimum wage and tariffs. Well, those are complex things you have to understand. When you have barter, when you have 300 pots or whatever, and you're trading with somebody, you can see that simply. So you wouldn't get a lot of objections to it. Same thing if you've got money and you got $1 and you buy a banana, and that's going on, you're not going to get a lot of rejection. But the more complex society gets, the more the explanation for what's going on gets more complex. And when you've got a situation where you get a job for some major corporation, you hear reports the company's making $1 billion, you're like, hey, what gives? I'm breaking my back in this job, and this is all I'm making? Well, economists can explain this. It's something called marginal revenue product. And we can draw the supply and demand curves, but the masses really are not thinking that way, just the same way they're not thinking about the solar system or anything else. It's not a case where we're hardwired against the minimum wage. There are plenty of people on the planet that understand why the minimum wage is a bad thing and causes people to lose jobs more, and it doesn't help. It's not a situation where there's benevolence. It's not a case where people think there's benevolence by actually doing this. They're confused. It's a complex phenomena, and unless you get a situation where the people that really understand this somehow get this down to the masses, it's not going to happen. And sometimes that takes time. That's what Hayek, Rothbard, Keynes, everybody understood this. Keynes famously wrote, "Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually some defunct economists." So it's the stuff coming down. Rothbard wrote the same thing. "The great fact of individual differences in viability is evident from the long record of human experience, hence the general recognition of the anti-human world of coerced uniformity and the mass membership of filing ranks versus those who are the thinkers, the leaders as far as thought leaders are concerned." So yes, there are leaders, and they can be leaders as far as telling people to go this way or that way, but they can also be intellectual leaders. And does this happen? Yes, we can see this. There's something called the Freedom Index, which Walter was actually originally involved in designing. If you look at the Freedom Index, the top countries are Switzerland, Taiwan, Hong Kong. And if you look at the bottom countries, they're Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Venezuela is the largest country in the world as far as oil reserves right now, but it's one of the poorest, and it has the less freedom. So what causes that? This paper just dismisses it, saying, oh, there's a few countries that are different. Well, if it's countries that are different, there's something that's not there as far as the hardwiring is concerned. Why are Hong Kong, Switzerland, and Taiwan so different? And the answer comes, it's actually, the economists have a word for it. It's called the resource curse. And what happens is a country that has a lot of resources, the leader of that doesn't have to promote freedom. His best play, if he wants to be king and get all the wealth, is just dig the minerals and oils and whatever it is out of the earth. He doesn't have to care about the people. He can leave them as paupers as long as they're working, dragging that stuff out. But if you're in Hong Kong or Taiwan or Switzerland, where there's nothing as far as resources, or very, very little, what happens is you need a king that's going to say, well, I better let these people create something because there's nothing to take. So that's what you have. And again, it's called a resource curse, and this is from the Wikipedia. The resource curse, also known as the paradox of plenty, refers to the paradox that countries with an abundance of natural resources, such as fuels and minerals, tend to have less economic growth and worse development outcomes than countries with fewer natural resources. So how do you explain that if everything's sort of hardwired? It's not hardwired that way. It's hardwired in many ways, but it's not hardwired as far as the freedom thing. When the leaders need to get freedom going, they get it going. Now, as far as civilization is concerned and where we are now, there's even a new kind of leadership that goes beyond just sort of the control of minerals and things. And that's where the intellectuals come in. For example, now we have politically correctness throughout the land, and that's pretty much influenced by a bunch of people who came out of Germany, the Frankfurt School, and the postmodernists. It's just a small group of people that sort of brought this out, and it caught on with the masses. The internet is a good example of how this stuff happens. When we see something go viral, that's really kind of like what can happen at the intellectual level. Sometimes it's just a small idea that just explodes and everybody on the internet sees it. Sometimes it's a guy that's consistent and there all the time, and it's just worked, and then he sort of explodes the way Jordan Peterson has. So it's all kinds of intellectual stuff that goes on and sort of goes viral. But it's not only the internet. There's intellectual stuff that goes on that way. And right now, the ones that are the most viral are the Frankfurt School and the postmodernists. And then you have an influence here in the United States in the government of the neoconservatives. But this is a very small group. It's very small intellectual powers. Rothbard recognized that. Hayek recognized that. In 1945, when Hayek taught at the London School of Economics, he had just written The Road to Serfdom, and a guy by the name of Anthony Fisher came to meet him. And Fisher was a wealthy guy. He actually ran chicken farms. He was kind of the Frank Perdue of his age. And what happened was he said, your stuff is great. I want to go into politics. I want to change the world. This is great stuff. And Hayek said, no, don't go into politics. Go into intellectual development. Go into getting the understanding out there amongst the intellectuals. And Fisher wrote in his book, I happened to read F.A. Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, and asked his advice. He told me, keep out of politics and make your case to the intellectuals, that is the teachers, the media, because they in turn influence the people who make the public sentiment, actually makes the legislation possible. So you've really got a situation here where the potential exists the same way the potential did that changed our view with regard to how the earth revolves, with regard to whether the earth was flat or not. That was a little bit easier to do. But there's all kinds of things that have changed on an intellectual level. And we now as a society are extremely complex. The barter was easy to get. Nobody could really object to that. Basic exchange where you're buying an apple with $1 is easy to do. But when it gets complex as we are, and we have a repo market, and we have wages that are far away from the product we're actually producing. We don't understand how it's happening. That's complex. Economists understand that. Economists understand marginal revenue product. Economists understand comparative advantage, but the population overall does not. And so the question becomes, is it because the population for some reason would be hardwired for the minimum wage? I don't see that. In addition, what's interesting is that, specifically with regard to the minimum wage, is when it was first brought up, it had nothing to do with hardwiring and people being beneficial and advocating for the minimum wage. It was done in a very evil and vicious way in the early 1900s when Woodrow Wilson was president. This stuff is not beneficial stuff. If I can find it here. Did you take this on me, Walter? Well, anyways, I recall the Woodrow Wilson. There are a couple of other guys. A guy from Stanford I wanted to quote, but well, maybe this is no. There was a guy from Stanford I wanted to quote, and it was just as racist and evil. But Woodrow Wilson, in promoting the minimum wage, said, "Look, the coolies," referring to Chinese, basically here in California, San Francisco. He said, "The coolies only can survive on a handful of rice every day. And therefore, that's why we need a minimum wage and things." I mean, that's evil. That's a leader being evil. That's not being beneficial. So there's a lot of confusion in this paper as far as beneficial. This stuff, being anti-trade is not being beneficial to anyone. It's not being beneficial to the people who are advocating it. It's confusion. It's confusion about complex items. And the case is, do we have the intellectuals that have the ability now or sometime in the future to get that message across to the people? It's clear that leaders have done it in the past in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan by just sort of leaving the people alone. It's not a case where it's hardwired, where this can't happen. And it's basically a situation where you have a mass belief in a lot of cases, or a great belief, but it's not hardwired the way language is, the way thinking is, the way the many things that Walter talked about as far as hardwired. It's not the same. There are plenty of people that understand it. It's a high intellectual level, and that's why it may take time, a long time, before it actually seeps down to the masses, or may never. But it's not a hopeless case. It's a case where you have the potential to get it across, because we understand how viral things happen. We understand how intellectual leaders pass their messages down, and that's where we stand. It has nothing to do with being hardwired against minimum wage. Thank you.
I thank Bob for doing an analysis of my paper, and I invite him to write it up and send it to that journal.
I'm really thinking of doing, yeah.
Do that, and then my co-authors and I will respond, and maybe we'll what is it, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and not only the debate over the paper, but even now we can do that sort of a thing. I was expecting Bob to say, no, the reason we have so few libertarians is something else. And the only thing I got out of it, maybe I missed something, but the only thing I got out of it was resource curse. That's what determines freedom. And I don't think that accounts for why we have so few libertarians. And also, I think the resource curse is a valid point, and I think Bob used it correctly. But there are counterexamples. Canada and the US are usually in the top 10 of economic freedom. And Canada and the US have got plenty of resources, so it's not necessarily a curse. Sometimes movie actors will have a party and they say they'll invite 10,000 of their best friends. It's a joke. We're not set up to have 10,000 best friends. We might have 2 or 3 best friends, and then 5 or 10 acquaintances, and then 15 family members. And that's pretty much it, unless we're very, very sociable, and then we can go up to 50. But we can't get anywhere near 10,000, which is another indication of we're hardwired, based on biology from many, many years ago, to not be able to have so many friends, or very few of us can have really 10,000 friends. Maybe Gandhi or Jesus Christ or somebody like that, I don't know, but the ordinary person can't do that. He mentions Hayek and Fisher and stay out of politics. Well, I have to take that with a grain of salt also. Who converted more people to libertarianism than anyone else? In my generation, I'm 78, Ayn Rand. Who converted more people than anyone else to libertarianism in the people who are now 30 and 40? Ron Paul. Well, what was Ron Paul? He was a doctor, but that's not why he converted anyone. He converted them because he was a politician. And I'm not a big fan of the Libertarian Party. I mean, Sarwar keeps criticizing Ron Paul for reasons I can't imagine, but I'm still a member of the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party does good work, so I'm not as against politics as Bob is. I want to explain a little bit more of stuff, and here I'm going to get in trouble with the politically correct people. I want to explain not only why we have so few libertarians, but why do we have so few women? Look at this group. We have 3 women here. And usually, that's about the proportion, 3 out of 30 or 3 out of 25. And half of the women, I don't know if it's the case here, they're girlfriends or wives of libertarians, and they're just tolerating. I remember, why is that? Well, the reason for it is because you have to be pretty smart to be a libertarian. Here is a frequency distribution, and this is good. This is bad. And here is the frequency distribution. And women and men have about the same IQ, but the average is about the same. But the standard deviation or the variance is stupendously different. Over here, this is where the bums are. This is where people in jail are. They're all men in jail and bums. Very few women like that. But out here, 4 standard deviations above the mean, there are very few women. That's why women don't win that many Nobel Prizes in STEM. They win it in literature and other stuff, which, God knows what the criteria is. Well, that's one reason. You have to be pretty smart to be a libertarian. Not only do you have to be a mutant, you have to be pretty smart. And it's mostly men who are really, really smart. On average, men and women are about the same. But when you get out to the right tail, how many Grandmaster chess players are women? 2 or 3? The Polgar sisters? That's it. The other 500 are all men. The same thing with physics or anything else. Now I'm going to do something even less politically correct. Why are there so few blacks? Why are there so few Orientals? Well, let me put up the IQ stuff on whites, blacks, and Orientals. And here you have blacks. Here you have whites. And here you have Orientals. So you'd think, based on my smart thesis, there'd be mostly Orientals, but it's not true. Why? Because again, the Oriental IQ is very high compared to the white IQ. This is the frequency, this is the IQ here, because this is the white, this is the Oriental. They're all clustered toward the middle. I'm exaggerating this, but that's the case. Now look, there's Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams who are geniuses, and they're black. I'm just talking about the average. And by the way, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell happen to be pretty strong libertarians in most things. And they violate Murray Rothbard's rule. Murray Rothbard's rule is people specialize in what they're horrible in. Like Milton Friedman was really good on minimum wage, free trade, rent control. But what did he specialize in? Money and vouchers, where he was horrible at? Well, Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams are a bunch of warmongers, but they hardly ever talk about it. What they mainly talk about is the ethics of discrimination and the economics of discrimination. So I'm trying to account for why there are so few blacks and so few women. And I think that the thesis is very robust. It can account for a lot of stuff. And again, as we're social scientists, we're supposed to, tell the truth. We're supposed to understand reality, and this is an important part of our reality. And it's true, this is not exactly politically correct, but what the heck, we should have no bounds. Now, Bob mentioned something very interesting about astronomy. And, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I don't really know that the Earth is flat. I mean, I take their word for it. It looks, I mean, that it's round. It looks pretty flat to me, but you know, I take what they say because I believe in specialization, division of labor. I don't really know that stuff. The astronomers are now having a debate: is Pluto a planet? I don't know. Whatever they say, I'll go along with. Why? Because none of them are trying to put each other in jail, right? The physicists are having a debate: is a reality like a sine or a cosine, or that's not right, a particle or something else? I don't know. I don't really care all that much, but whatever they say is fine. Whereas in environmentalism, they actually try to put each other in jail. Well, the left tries to put the right in jail. And whatever they say, I can't believe. And the same thing with the Holocaust. Do you know in Europe and in Canada, if you deny the Holocaust or diminish it, you can go to jail? Well, what kind of a social science is that? Now, I think there was a Holocaust. I have cousins and uncles who died. I'm Jewish. But that's not the point. The point is we sort of trust the experts when there's a free-floating dispute among them. But when you can go to jail for having the wrong view or lose your job over the wrong view, then we tend, I think, quite properly not to take their word for it. Bob makes a very good point about Hong Kong, Singapore. I think you forgot Singapore, but you mentioned that. Switzerland being the top freedom places, but they're not really libertarians. And I mean, they have more economic freedom, but libertarianism is more than economic freedom. And the reason Hong Kong had a lot of economic freedom is some historical thing about Britain, having benign neglect or laissez-faire. So I think that's probably one of the weakest points on my side and one of the strongest points on Bob's side. To be fair, we want to learn from each other. Namely, I think my theory, or the theory of me and my co-authors, is a robust theory that it explains a lot, but it doesn't explain everything. And I think Bob has put his finger on a relative weakness. Why is it that they're so free market oriented? But again, free market is only a part of libertarianism. Libertarianism is free market and then personal liberties and then non-aggression in war. And in Singapore, if you chew gum, they'll put you in jail. The Hong Kong people have all sorts of weird things as well. But on economic freedom, they're really good. Thanks for letting me share again.
Okay. All right. So first of all, with this, I mean, I don't really have an opinion on female versus male intellectual capabilities or Caucasian versus black. There could be all kinds of reasons, especially for the blacks, why they show less on IQ. I don't care. Okay, for this debate. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I have no idea. I haven't studied it enough. I can see arguments that I've made, not knowing a lot in detail, that there's probably lots of reasons, government reasons, why the black thing is skewed that way. However, I do agree that there are some people that are smarter than others. That's sort of, I run into that a lot, okay? So basically, the point is, so there's smart people that figure stuff out, and there are other people that don't. But Walter, do you really think that the women or the blacks do not think the Earth revolves around the sun, or the barycenter something versus the sun revolving around the Earth? You don't really need a high IQ. It's this people getting that message across. It's that viral thing again. So this tells us nothing. It tells us there's smart people and not smart people, and I get that. The smart people figure stuff out, and the rest of us sort of go along. Now, as far as the Canada, United States, that's actually something Hans Hermann Hoppe wrote quite a bit about. And what happens is when a country starts out with a lot of freedoms to sort of build the wealth, then the wealth is there. I mean, when the country really started out, it was really free enterprise. And now in the United States, we have tremendous wealth. So you have the politicians going after it. So that's kind of an odd, because then it becomes almost the same thing as a natural resource kind of situation. So you have this tremendous wealth in the United States. So that's what's going on as far as that's concerned. That kind of natural resources weren't there in the beginning. Maybe a little bit with tobacco. I don't know the whole history of that. And 10,000 friends argument, I don't know what that means. I mean, we here came here by trains, by buses. All kinds of people were driving us. We might have been listening to music on a iPod or cell phone. I don't know. I don't listen to music, so I don't know. iPhones, however you do that. All kinds of things that sort of we did today, interacting with people, eating restaurants or buying food at a grocery store. And we don't need these people. That's the whole thing about complex civilization. We can deal with people where we don't need to know them in detail. We don't need them to be our friends. And we are perfectly capable of doing that. So this thing where we only can deal with friends just doesn't wash. As far as Hayek in politics, I just merely pointed that out to show that Hayek recognized that there was something else going on besides politics, the higher intellectual level. And anybody reading my blog will recognize that I talk frequently about I consider politics rearguard action. The intellectual stuff that Hayek recognized is generally going to be the stuff that will convert people to libertarianism. The political stuff, Ron Paul was Ron Paul was just really great. He got the message out to a lot of people, but he didn't really have that fire in his belly to be a politician or anything like that. So it's really good. I mean, he's one in a million kind of thing. So I have no objection to that kind of person, but I also have no objection to a lot of other politics. So I don't really fall into that category where I'm objecting to politics. I see them again, if I see a politician on a very, very important issue who's really strong, I may not care about his other stuff, and I may sort of support him. I don't vote, and I'm going to be putting out a big essay before the election 2020 on why I don't vote. It's very complex, so for these people, not quite for these people yet, but basically it's a situation where politics can be used if for some reason there's a guy that is anti-Fed, which I think is an important case, or anti-war, so that's why I'm kind of a fan of Tulsi Gabbard, but I don't think she's going to end up going anywhere. That kind of thing. Then as far as Hong Kong, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because it was actually the British overseer, I don't know what the technical, but there was a guy by the name of Coppersweet who actually did a lot to make Hong Kong as free as it was. And you see this in other places. Sometimes it just takes one person. Ludwig Erhard, after World War II, he created what's known as the German economic miracle. And you really have to wonder what would have happened to Germany if Erhard wasn't there. Basically, what he did is he went in just on his own, took off all the price controls, which put the markets back in action. Before that, there weren't any. And you basically had a situation where one man, it didn't really matter what the masses thought. It didn't really matter. They weren't hardwired towards price controls, really. You get the right person in the right place who can either act or can get the message out, and that's all you need. It's not the same thing as language or thinking, where you're not going to change. You're not going to stop people from using language or thinking or things that are really hardwired. These are things that just happen to be complex, so it's very difficult for the average person to understand. And what happens is somehow these messages get out. Somehow the message got out to all of us. Galileo, they put him under house arrest when he first said the earth revolved around the sun. So it's not a pretty thing when it first gets out. There's a lot of pressure against it. And you look at it and you might think, this is hardwired, but it's not really hardwired. When it's intellectual thinking and this actual intellectual logic that can go in against that trend, the problem doesn't become one of man being hardwired. The problem becomes one of how the people who are sophisticated and understand the complex situations are able to get that message across in some way to the masses who, for whatever reason, are holding some other view. And that's the situation, the way I see it. So, thank you.
A certain behavior is a survival behavior that's a result of the snake. I didn't ever hear a specific, similar cause and effect that could lead to a hard wiring in the brain. And if you could clarify what the circumstances are where believing in freedom is actually unhelpful to someone's survival, I think that would really strengthen your case.
Right. Thanks for the question. It's not that you get hardwired. It's rather that the people who were afraid of snakes left more children than the ones who weren't. The people who treated everyone like a family left more children than the people who were free enterprise a million years ago. If you were free enterprise a million years ago, it didn't help you leave more children. So it's not that any one person got more hardwired, it's just that some people left more children than other people. The people who treated everyone else like a family left more children than the people. Is not good in a commercial interaction with millions of people because we can't do that. I'm not sure if I could say it better than that, but the point is, when I get freshman students, I get them in New Orleans, and we had Katrina, and there's such a thing as price gouging. Price gouging means that when you have very little of it, because the supply was cut back and people wanted it, the price goes up. And and the governor of Louisiana said, anyone who price gouges, we're throwing him in jail. And everyone said yes. Or many people said yes, throw those rascals into jail because they're exploiting people by charging too high price. Well, you don't charge your cousin a high price. You don't charge your brother or your sister or your mother a high price. But you charge strangers a high price, and there are benefits of charging a high price because then people from Montana will bring the stuff in, and at a high price, the first 100 people in Walmart won't grab it all. They'll allow some to be left for other people. But this, as Bob eloquently says, takes a little economic sophistication. But the initial reaction is, this is callous and evil, and it stems from the fact that they are treating everyone like a family, and that benefited people a million years ago. But it doesn't benefit people now because we're becoming communists.
Thank you.
Michael, you want to?
No, you can. In other words, I go first on this one, but you can also comment if you want. And the next one, you'll go first, and I can.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Isn't that the agreement?
Yeah.
It seems fair. So
Yeah.
if you-
Okay. Well, I'll just make it short. I still don't see where you're saying. I mean, it's very easy with the snake example that John brought up to understand where the reaction is, and it's not so much where this sort of hardwire against freedom is. I mean, what's going to happen where someone's going to you're going to get that kind of reaction? It seems to me it's more of an intellectual situation which can be changed. It's not like the snake thing. Okay, Michael.
So I think there's a couple of things that are relevant here. Walter kind of alluded to one of them, and the other one I don't think was relevant. And I'm speaking about America, right? So one of them is societal amplifiers, and there's two big ones, right? There's the education system and there's mass media. And for the last several decades in America, they've been decidedly anti-freedom, right? Even more so today. And so I think what that does is that moves your probability distribution more from what it would naturally be, in the pure genetic, it would be a little bit more, hopefully maybe.
Yeah, no, I would sort of argue against that. I think what mainstream media does and what schools do and what most people do is reflect what the common thinking is. The views that
These are amplifiers. Of
what's that?
These two, education.
Yeah, but I don't think that matters. Okay, when you're going to get change, it will probably come from somewhere else. It always, remember, they threw Galileo in jail. That was the government. I mean, that's serious amplification. Shut up. Okay, but yet now we still none of us hold the view that the Earth is the center of the universe. Okay, and the government really tried to shut people up as far as that's concerned. So I don't really see it as where that comes from. It really goes back to Hayekian kind of view where there's tons of inputs coming from all different kind of directions, and you can't predict the future. So because there's so much coming in. So that's something that I think falls along that way. And that's why mainstream media gets things wrong. That's why Hillary Clinton thought she was going to be president. Mainstream media did, and they missed it because they can't understand. They can't get everything, and you don't know where something's going to come from the side and hit them over the head.
I would add to education and the media, Hollywood.
Yeah.
They also amplify leftism. And I think that that's a good proximate explanation as to why we're in such dire straits, libertarian-wise. But then we have to ask, well, why is it that the media is that way? Why is it that the clergy is that way? Why is it that Hollywood is that way? We have to dig deeper. And I'm digging deeper. And I don't know that it's 100% of the explanation of everything, but I think it has a lot of legs and it's got a lot of zest to it. It explains a lot. Not perfectly, but it explains a lot. And we want to know why we have so few people. Because most of us are in the business of promoting liberty, and we want to know why are we failing. And we are failing. I mean, just look at the Democratic debate and then look at Donald Trump on tariffs. We're failing. Or at least we're not doing as well as we'd like to be or we should be doing. And we have to understand it. And here is a theory. I think it's a pretty good theory, B+, A- kind of theory. And I'm waiting for Bob's to write he said it would take 3 hours. Well, that means 30 pages, roughly, or something like that. I don't know the exact numbers. So I'd like to hear,
I can do that.
I'd like to hear him, I'd like to see what he writes in response. And that's the way I do things. I mark up a paper and then I write based on the markings. And we'll have it out in the literature. And I look forward to this, and I speak for my co-authors. We will probably respond to Bob.
So I didn't get to the second part, which was what I call the curse of affluence, which is people in subsistence societies in Afghanistan, Africa, or whatever, they're not worried about dolphin-safe tuna, plastic straws, and fair trade coffee, right? They're very close to reality, right? Those things can only be concerned with people in affluent societies. And in affluent societies where there's so much wealth, the propensity to say, hey, let's redistribute the wealth. Look at that poor guy on the sidewalk. Let's redistribute. And of course, redistribution requires force. And so I think affluence has a tendency of pushing, the distribution. If you go back in time in America, 150 years, you'll find a lot more libertarians, right? They didn't call themselves that. Personal responsibility, personal accountability, self-reliance. I think that was a much bigger thing than 150
Yeah. Well, at least if you look at it on a global level, affluence creates the desire for free market. I mean, you had people going over the Berlin Wall seeking the freedom and affluence of the West. So, you really can't just pick things out and say, this is the trend. It's complicated stuff. And I think that really explains why we don't have a libertarian society more than anything. It's a very, very complex message to get out. There's lots of us, not in terms of percentage, but it's not a case where there aren't that many libertarians around. It's a case of getting that message out to the people who aren't thinking about it, who may not be capable of thinking about it. How do we get that out the way people get out other things that we all now take for granted? And I wonder how much of a pessimist you would have been after Galileo got house arrest. You would have never thought people would have thought the Earth revolving around the sun would ever emerge.
Well, I think you make an interesting point about affluence, and years ago we were freer, and in many ways we were, but in some ways we weren't. We had slavery, we had lynching, we had the War of Northern Aggression in 1861, where a lot of people got killed. So it's sort of a mixed bag. You can't really say that there's a 100% correlation between affluence and socialism. Although, the reason that Sweden could be as socialist as it was is because for many years they were very free enterprise. And even now, Bernie Sanders, when you ask him which country is socialist, he'll mention all the Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian countries in this thing that Bob mentioned of rating economic freedom, they're all in the top decile. Top decile.
There's a great video on YouTube from Bjorn Lomborg about Sweden.
Yep.
Sweden has no minimum wage.
Yep. Very free enterprise.
They have government health care, but it's all voucher, all delivered by private. Same thing for education.
Yep.
Private vouchers.
Sweden, very free enterprise.
Yeah.
Okay, who else has a question? Malcolm?
I have a couple of comments. First one, more on trade. I think you'll find as far back as you go in history, there's always been trade. And it's always been the case that in the family, communism is great. And the moment you step outside the family, you need kind of market relations. But as far back as you go, you'll find trade existed, and those pots and pans and and stuff found their way hundreds and thousands of miles away. So it's not true. I mean, what is true that if you had the kind of behavior that was entrepreneurial, you took a little bit of risk, you probably did improve the whole group. So I don't think it's true that kind of pro-freedom behavior didn't function well all those years ago. Secondly, switching tack completely, you started off your presentation with something along the lines of, if there was justice, we'd all be libertarians. Mm-hmm. Well, just personally, I find that a pretty ludicrous statement. In the same way as someone would say, some people prefer Sophocles and some people prefer Shakespeare, and if there was justice in the world, everyone would prefer Shakespeare. I mean, we have different values, and even in this audience, I guarantee you, if you ask people to start talking about the definition of freedom, it would be very, very different. I'm sure we'd go from a conservative spectrum to a market anarchist, to a limited government, to a left-wing kind of anarchist. I mean, there would be a lot of, right? We all have different values, a multiplicity of values. And there isn't one right value that in a just world, everyone would agree. God forbid, that would be a terrible thing. But I know, I'll leave it there.
Well, I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since it was on me. Yes, there was trade all throughout human history. But human history only goes back 5,000–10,000 years. We're talking a million years back, when there was very, very little trade, when we lived in a group of 15 or 30 people and we didn't trade with anyone. You saw somebody from a different tribe, you killed them. It was very, very different. So this was the whole last third of our paper, saying that yes, we have predilections toward trade also. As I said, Adam Smith, bartering and trucking and all, but it's only skin deep, mere 10,000, 20,000 years. But human beings have lived way, way longer than that, and we go back to the mammals. Now, with regard to justice, to me, the essence of justice is the non-aggression principle. Keep your mitts off of other people, other innocent people. Keep your mitts off of them and their property. If that's not justice, then nothing is. Now look, you get 10 libertarians and you ask them a question, you'll get 11 answers. I appreciate that we have subtle differences, but what we all agree on is that it's unjust to initiate violence against innocent people, whereas the non-libertarians don't agree with that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a case of just misunderstanding my thought about complexity. There's certainly been simple trade, but then when you get a situation where we live in a complex society where we're trading a lot with China, so Trump comes up and he has all his followers and they say that's bad because of this and that. So the Great Depression had tariffs. There's always been some kind of protectionism against trade. Sometimes it's just the manufacturer wanting protection against a certain thing. Certainly NAFTA isn't completely free trade. I don't see where we've ever had completely free trade.
I actually have a question for Walter, son Adamson.
Go ahead.
I
Better him than me.
Yeah, I remember hearing something recently, I can't remember the source, but it doesn't matter. It's somebody among all his colleagues who grew up in the West, they were all some kind of socialist or communist. Among his friends who
are we talking about?
I don't even remember, it doesn't matter. Among the parents, the colleagues whose parents or grandparents had grown up under communism, they're all anti-communist. So maybe there's a sort of bias that if you're just sailing on the open ocean, you veer a little bit in one direction, but isn't that bias corrected to some extent by people's experiences? And now we have a lot of examples of the market and communism, and we might learn from that.
Communism has never existed. Sorry. Permanent communism has existed. Walter could talk more about that, but real communism has never existed. It's a fantasy.
Well, my response to that is we had East Germany and West Germany. And if we didn't have pure communism on East Germany, we had pretty damn good communism. And North Korea and South Korea, we had a lot more communisticness in North than in South. And at night, you look down on them, and North Korea there's no lights there. South Korea is all lit up. And we have to explain why this is, and somehow we forget all about that. Now Bernie is, and what's her name? Warren, Pocahontas is socialism is great, and we forget about East Germany, West Germany, South Korea. It's just we have to explain why they're so popular. Why especially young people, freshmen, and if they gave the vote to 16-year-olds, we'd be through. That they should raise it to 25 or 30 or something, then we'd have more sense. But this little girl, Greta from Thunen, a very angry young girl, 16 years old, doesn't know anything about environmentalism. We just had 500 people sign a statement, 500 environmental types saying that there's no real danger, we're not going to all die in 12 years. And if you look at the past predictions of all these people, in the 70s, by 85 we'll all be dead. It's just utter nonsense. So we have to understand why is this so irrational? And my theory is that there's something in biology that disposes us in that direction. It doesn't demand that because, look, we have counterexamples. Us mutants and people who study economics, I think, can overcome that. And you have to be pretty bright to that. But why is it so popular? Why does Bernie get so many people out rooting for him? And why this little girl, Greta Thunen, is so popular? You got a lot of little kids doing this. Well, their teachers told them to do it. Okay, fine. But why did their teachers tell them to do that? I think we have to look at biology a little bit. Well, what's the?
So my response is sort of in a question. So you think people are hardwired to believe global warming? Yeah, sure. Really? Yeah, a little bit. I just think it just happens to be where the messaging is going at a certain time. And
well, global warming, not so much global warming, but anti-capitalism. Namely, it's the fault of capitalism. Now, it need not be global warming. We know that, what is it, the verdict is in, the verdict is in, the claim keeps changing. Whether it's profiteering or global warming or any of the or unemployment or whatever it is, it's capitalism's fault. And yes, I think that's biologically there's a biological inclination behind that it's always capitalism's fault because when we were, again to repeat, when we were a million years ago, there was no capitalism. There was no benefit to leaving children to be pro-capitalist. But there was a lot of benefit to be cooperative and have voluntary socialism, namely cooperation. Michael, you want to call on somebody?
Well, it seems wiser, instead of reaching back thousands of years, tens of thousands of years for evidence, it'd be interesting to, at least I have a hypothesis to why, say in the post-war era, the Ludwig Erhard era in the 50s and 60s, there was the general masses that got amplified by the media were very pro-capitalist. It was a much more pro-capitalist era. But then the postmodernists, as you said, the Foucault types and their modern equivalents, have said, freedom and the non-aggression principle is one form of justice, but there's another, which is millions of people have lost in the genetic lottery. They were born at the left end of the continuum. They were growing up in an area that was deprived for various reasons. So a greater justice is not non-aggression, but it's worth the price of aggression on the haves in order to equate for the losers in genetic lottery, and therefore your point, Bob, the malleability is more persuasive than the biological in terms of desire for freedom. What do you think?
Why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's really it has to do more with complex situations, complex thought being required. And when it's complex thought, the masses they're just not paying attention, and there's no reason for them not. Again, I'm not an astronomer, I'm not a medical guy, so there's all kinds of things that I think are right that I have no idea, as far as even what I'm eating as far as health, but I have no idea. My diet isn't working right now, but I have no idea when it comes to medical or the astronomy or any of that kind of stuff. My specialty is the economics, but for most people, it's the same way. They're not thinking about this stuff, and it really comes down to how the message is delivered, how it sort of goes viral, and we can understand that in terms of what's going on as far as the internet. We can see now how stuff goes viral. Sometimes it's just one individual person puts something up, and then it blows up because it's the kind of idea that catches on. And then we have the ones that are stronger as far as being more permanent in how they catch on. So it helps us a lot understand that stuff is going on, but the exact mechanism, what clicks when and all that is not something that is understood, especially by libertarians. Otherwise, if we knew that, we'd have a libertarian society now. So it requires either the right circumstances or situation where someone understands the current circumstances in a way.
Yeah, I happen to agree that the religion is a big problem, and the environmental movement is definitely a religion. Marxism was sort of one. Yeah, so that is pretty hardwired. It's universal. For libertarianism, I think that the way to advance it in this environment, even more so in this environment today, is a strong stress on the moral backbone of the NAP and such things. And another thing, that humans, there's very few really evil humans. Not too many Stalins and Maos, but everybody's lazy. And that is a big problem.
Well, there are Maos and Stalins and Pol Pots and Hitlers who are very vicious. But then there were rapists and murderers. I mean, you had all these guys shooting 10 people, strangers, for no reason at all. So there is 1 or 2% of people who are evil. I wanted to mention Ayn Rand and religion. Ayn Rand, one of the problems of the libertarian movement is that a lot of us in my generation came from Ayn Rand and have a little objectivism in their hearts and hate religion. Well, look, we had the Crusades, and what was it, that stuff, that killed about Inquisition, thanks. Do you know how many people the Inquisition killed? About 5,000 over about 3 centuries. Namely nothing compared to what Mao and Pol Pot and Hitler did. Religion did nothing. So I oppose Ayn Rand's opposition to religion from libertarianism. I welcome theists. I'm not a theist. I think it's wrong. But look, I like chess and I don't like checkers. Does that mean I don't want checker players in libertarian? I like Mozart and Bach and Handel and Haydn. Does that mean if you like Shostakovich you can't be a libertarian? That's crazy. We should welcome to our midst everyone who believes in the non-aggression principle and private property rights. And Ayn Rand has had a baleful influence on the libertarian movement by making religious people feel unwelcome. So I want religious people to feel welcome. Just because I'm not religious doesn't mean I don't want them to be welcome. I want to welcome every person who believes in the non-aggression principle and private property rights, no matter what other tastes they have on religion or movies or music or anything, chess or anything.
Yeah, I would just second what Walter says there. As far as I don't see religion as a problem. I don't think we have to battle people with religion one way or the other. I know a number of very religious people who are very, very good libertarians and respect the non-aggression principle, and I don't see there's a problem. The key is that what drives people to religion can be very similar to what an approach that libertarian, not that it becomes religious, but the idea of looking outside oneself for an answer to the world. So,
anyone not ask questions, Mark? So I was reflecting on the idea that people treat their family different than non-family, and thinking about what is that difference, or an example of that. And it came to me that, or one example of that is sacrifice. Right? We're willing to sacrifice things for our family that is inappropriate to sacrifice in a broader economic context. And it seems to me that it's possible that many people inappropriately extend the notions of family beyond themselves or beyond their family, and that's where the That's it.
Oh, so-
No more questions. And that's where the opposition to the fundamentals of libertarianism come from, right? I don't think when I have a conversation with people, everybody sort of fundamentally agrees in the non-aggression principle up until they realize somebody they believe should be making a sacrifice and they don't see that they are. So I'm curious about your.
No, I think you're absolutely 100% correct. If you price gouge your mother, we have a problem with that. But if you price gouge a total stranger, we also have a problem with that if we're unsophisticated in economics. So we're applying, there are two realms. One is sometimes called mundane or commercial, and the other is amiable or familial. And my analysis of why we fail so much is that people improperly apply to commerce what's appropriate in families. But you can make the opposite mistake too. You can charge your 4-year-old kid money for breakfast, which is preposterous, and yet it's part of the market. So, in other words, what I'm not saying is market, uber alles. There's a place for markets, but not within the bosom of your family. I mean, if your wife charges you to go to bed with her, that's a problem for the marriage. And yet it's part of commerce, right? I mean, if you go to a prostitute, she's going to charge you. But your wife shouldn't, if you have a reasonable relationship. So what I'm saying is you have to, what did I say? What did Jesus say? Give stuff to the king that's in the king's realm and don't give stuff in Caesar's realm or something like that. Well, what I'm saying is something like that. Give to the commerce what's appropriate for commerce and give to the family what's appropriate for the family. But we don't do it. We very rarely charge mothers and daughters money for things. But we make the opposite mistake. We try to think of the iPencil, the millions of people that made the pencil. We try to treat them like family, and we don't want to price gouge them, and we don't want to buy and sell babies or whatever these other things that horrify people. That's why we have so few libertarians, because people are hardwired or inclined against that.
Anyone not ask a question? Clayton, did you?
Yeah, one on that subject there. Utility is something that was discovered with Mises, which is the use of the principle methodological dualism. And what you just brought up was an example of that. And yet it's one of these things that we're tempted to think is kind of an act of hypocrisy, when actually it's not, and it has a usefulness. And if you could, as a teacher, you're both teaching, kind of go into the issue of methodological dualism, its application to real life situations.
Do you want to go first?
No, go ahead, you can go first.
Methodological dualism, I think, is absolutely correct, that there's two methods. There's the empirical method and there's the praxeological method. And the empirical method is perfectly good for things where we only have hypotheses, like physics, chemistry, biology. But there's another realm, and it's called logic or mathematics. And there you don't have empirical tests as to whether 2 + 2 is 4. Or whether, if Socrates is a man and all men are mortals and Socrates is immortal. You don't test that stuff. And the difference between Austrianism and mainstream economics is we believe in methodological dualism. And I'm very delighted that you mentioned that, because I never connected the Austrian methodological dualism with the sort of dualism between the family and commerce that I'm talking about. So I'm very grateful to that question. I think it's a very important thing. And when Bob writes his thing, I'm going to, in my reply, I'm going to mention that.
Yeah, I didn't Mises reject the methodological tool?
No, Hayek rejected it, but Mises, this is pure Misesianism and
Yeah.
Rothbardianism.
Yeah.
And Hans Hoppeianism.
Yeah, I don't really see how it sort of really applies. I mean, what we're really talking about here is there's kind of no empirical test versus a theoretical test on this. We've got a situation where, sort of in an empirical sense, we see where people are definitely hardwired in situations, and in other situations they're not. And I don't really see how one would argue or prove empirically otherwise. We're sort of hardwired against the minimum wage. I mean, there's no a priori way to get that way. And I don't think there's a empirical way to get that way. It's just not done.
No, I would say we're hardwired in favor of the minimum wage. Did you have a slip of the tongue? Or?
In favor?
Most people favor the minimum wage. You go out to the
Yeah,
street.
well, I thought that's what I said. Did I say something else?
You might have had a slip of the tongue.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's my view. I don't think there's.
Anyone else not have a question? Ask a question first. I didn't ask a question. So I have a more inclusive view that is comprehensive of both what you believe. And first of all, I wouldn't use the term hardwired. I think genetic predisposition or genetic proclivity explains it more, explains it better. And people, any emotion people have has a genetic predisposition in my view. So some people love and some people hate, and I think they do this because they have a genetic predisposition or a biological proclivity. And some people love at times and some people hate at times. Some people are nasty and sometimes they're nice. Some people eat healthily at times and some people eat unhealthily at times. So I would say that people have genetic predisposition against freedom, and people have a genetic predisposition for freedom, because we see both in history. We see both people acting freely at times and people acting tyrannically at times.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Michael, on that. Do you think there's a genetic predisposition into believing the Earth is flat or that the Earth is the center of the universe?
Well, I think there's a genetic predisposition to agree with the mob and agree with authority figures.
So
there's a genetic predisposition in there, but it's not specifically to think that the Earth is flat or round.
Yeah. So what genes have you discovered that, say, cause some people to believe in the minimum wage versus sort of a just going along with the crowd thing?
It's not that I discovered genes, it's that I observe how people act, and people are biological creatures. So people's actions come from their biology, from their genes, from their predisposition.
What is the connection? I mean, there are clearly people who are in favor of the minimum wage, okay?
Yeah.
But so why isn't it just that they're going along with the crowd when they really don't understand the complex thing? What genetic, you're claiming there's some kind of genetic connection to this. So what is the genetic connection? What do you see and you go, aha, that's genetic, that's a gene?
I see humans believing certain things, and humans are biological creatures, and they function in terms of certain thoughts, certain ideas, which come from, which tend to come from their biology. Saying it's from a gene or two genes is oversimplification. It comes from a combination of genes, interaction of genes, proteins, DNA, things like that.
But you can't identify them specifically.
I can't identify them specifically. No, I'm not a geneticist. I can't identify them specifically.
Yeah, but do you think anybody can?
I don't think.
Not yet, no. but there is evidence of genetic predispositions for schizophrenia, for depression.
Yeah, but we're talking about the minimum wage.
So, like that.
So let me ask you, could it be possible that there's a gene or some kind of combination of genes or whatever that would cause people at one point to be in favor of minimum wage, but then it also is complex. If some things happen in the environment or some other factors happen that would cause them to be against the minimum wage?
Yeah, for example.
So in other words, it's not a case where people are genetically against the minimum wage and that's a hard answer and they always will be?
No, it's a predisposition. And some people are better at math than others. Maybe it's the people who are better at math have a certain view of the minimum wage. Some people tend to be long-term thinkers. And if you are against the minimum wage, it's because you see not only the immediate effects, but you see the long-term effects. So I think these are talents that people have and abilities that people have that they tend to be born with.
So in other words, what we're doing is we're getting back to the leaders and the followers thing pretty much. I mean, there's people that have long thoughts, think things out, and there are people who generally don't, or at least not with regard to economics. And so that's all we got here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me also comment on this. I agree with Michael that there are predispositions of pro and con freedom. It's just that I believe that the ones that are anti-freedom are deeper, longer lived, millions of years, whereas I believe that the pro markets are just for all of recorded history, which is a lot less time for us to get predisposed in that direction. By predisposed doesn't mean that any one person changes. It just means that predisposed means that if you have this certain view, you're more likely to leave children like you than if you don't have that view.
Okay, we're
Now,
down to,
what's that?
I thought we were getting down to the wrap up.
Oh, okay.
Well, let this guy have a chance. He didn't.
How about the person in the back? Take a chance.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the notion of Dunbar's number? Dunbar was an anthropologist, and it's a number of 150, and it's based on sort of the number of people, more or less, that we can have meaningful relationships with. So it's larger than the family, but significantly smaller than sort of random people out there. Can you talk about that range of people in terms of meaningful relationships and motivations, and kind of us versus them?
Well, 150 is a little high. I kept using the number 30 or 40 or 50. But 150 is in the ballpark. So I can see that. Certain people are more amiable and more sociable, and they could have 150 friends. Most people, I think that would be a little high. So I think that's a reasonable upper bound on how many friends you can have.
Just one anthropologically sustainable group is 85
85?
for genetic.
Okay, well, 85, 150, something like that, and not 10,000, and not 2 billion. I just wanted to say that Bob and I agree on probably 99.8% of
That's
everything. And I'm just delighted to have this debate.
Hey, yo, Walt, same here, same here.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, I think Bob's distribution functions for IQ also explain why libertarian parties are so boring.
Okay, so I have 5 minutes now, and you have 5 minutes,
I think
Walter,
we've,
right?
No, we each have a summary now.
okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, so I don't even know if I'm going to take 5 minutes, but first of all, first I want to clear up a thing with regard to what Michael said about my book, Private Property Society book. He said I was against the NAP, and that's not correct. What I see the NAP as not being fundamental. It's the Private Property Society is fundamental. However, you can't, in a particular society, you could have the NAP, and I have no objections to NAP, and would probably be very comfortable living in a NAP society. So it's not that I'm against it, it's that I don't see it as being the foundational.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Now, a few comments with regard to some of the last things that Walter said. First of all, he said, trying to explain the visceral hate of Trump, and he's sort of trying to explain this in terms of, I think, free markets or something, and explaining this why you don't really see this on the right about lefties. But there's more visceral hate about Hillary than anybody in the world. Whether any of these visceral hates are justified, I think it's pretty good to hate most politicians. But it's not a case where I don't think it's limited to because when I took for strategic reasons, I supported Hillary against Trump in the election. I mean, I got tremendous negative feedback. I mean, people telling me, writing me emails, seeing you in 8 years and stuff like that. I mean, they did not like it at all. It was they're pretty angry people. And I don't support Hillary. I just thought for strategic reasons that I prefer Hillary over Trump. Largely because, and I wrote this the day after Trump was elected, I wrote and said that this is not going to help anyone except socialists, and the young people are going to turn to socialism, and it's really, really what we're seeing. And I think that was obvious way, way early during the debate. The kids all think he's a racist capitalist, and they're looking for a solution. There's no libertarian solution that they're aware of, and so they turn to the socialists. It's not much different than that. Another thing Walter said is he's saying that this sort of anti-freedom thing goes back millions of years. but it's not really an anti-freedom thing. There wasn't a minimum wage millions of years ago. So it's really a case where these people sort of progressed in their own communities, and then somehow the world got really civilized. So that this building we're standing in right now was the tallest building in San Francisco, and now it's tiny. In 1914, this was the tallest building going. So what happened is there's been tremendous cooperation. It's not a case where we're all sort of standing around and pretending we're all families. That's not what's going on. There's a tremendous amount that has gone on well beyond that. We use and interact with people on a daily basis that we don't know anything about. And it's a mistake to sort of give the impression that somehow we're wired against doing this. We're not wired against this. There's confusion at the complex level. There's confusion about minimum wage, trade, and all that. And there are explanations for that, which some people get. It's marginal revenue product explains why minimum wage is a bad idea. Comparative advantage explains why protectionism is a bad idea. But this is not something that the average person is ever going to figure out. And the problem is that unlike other messages that have come down, it's a communication thing. It's not that these people can't be switched onto it. It's not built in. They're doing things every day that are not necessarily pro-family and interacting in a way that goes well beyond what the family is about. And then they're not thinking deeply about this. And you see just too many examples of where freedom has broken through to various degrees in various places. And so if it's broken through in a few areas, why can't it break through? There's no hard wire that prevents it the way it would prevent us, say, from being able to not sleep. I mean, that's a hard wire. Being able to not think, just shut off the mind. Maybe somebody can do that. I don't know, but that's not something that normally can be done. Or to not use language. These are things that are really innate in us, and they're not minimum wage and trade barriers and all that kind of stuff. So, Walter.
This is the first public lecture I gave on this paper that I wrote. And I learned one thing. I'm not going to use the word as in hardwired. I'm going to use inclined or predisposed or given or something like that, biased in favor of. I think hardwired made it sound like, automatons, or robots. We have to be socialists or something like that. But apart from that, I think we are inclined toward that. That is, we're inclined toward amiability. We're inclined toward treating people like family members. And it is appropriate for 150 or 80 people. But it's not appropriate for the grocer or the Uber guy or the guy who sold you shoes or the guy who made the shoes that you never meet. You meet the retailer who sold you the shoes, but you don't meet the wholesaler, the jobber, the manufacturer. You don't meet the farmer who cut the leather for the shoes. You can only deal with them in an arm's length way. And to think that you can deal with them the way you deal with your 80 friends or family members is grotesque, and it accounts for why we don't have as much freedom as we otherwise would if people didn't do that. Thanks for your attention.